Hi there! My name is Jeff Venter, and this is my D&Dify It series, where I take all your favorite TV shows, movies, and other popular media and turn them into Dungeons & Dragons adventures. Today we're covering a show very near and dear to my heart, possibly my favorite show ever, and that is Steven Universe. Seriously, I've cosplayed as Jasper rather poorly, mind you. My wife did a much better Yellow Diamond, and we've partied with Estelle in those very costumes at Comic-Con when she did the shooting of her Stronger Than You music video. I've attended the many Steven Universe Comic-Con panels as a priority over every other panel in the years that they've appeared there, and we have both sung our hearts out at the sing-along bits during those panels. And I've been a huge fan of Rebecca Sugar in general after finding out what an amazing person that they are. But I should get back to the video, so for those of you that are visiting my channel for the first time, we tend to leave the low-hanging fruit that is your Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and other major franchises in favor of those that are truly unusual or are simply less covered as Dungeons & Dragons adventures. Those other worlds have been covered in immense detail and even full RPG game systems of their own, so here we are in the future in Beach City. More on that in a minute. Also, players, you need not worry. I passed the script by your game master, and he or she said that it was a-okay for you to watch this video, since they'll still have some tricks up their sleeve come game time. Videos in my D&Dify It series cover the fun parts of adventure building, including the setting, both motivational and mechanical character options for the characters that you end up bringing to the table, as well as basic ideas for the monsters and challenges that you might face. All right, my crystal gems, let's get ready because here comes a thought. Let's jump right in and D&Dify Steven Universe. We'll start with the standard disclaimer, of course, which is to say, spoilers ahead. The magic powers that the gems possess will be heavily discussed in the player character part of the show. We'll be looking at characters and events from the show as reference for the adventure that we end up building, and we'll be singing songs as we go along the whole thing. However, I don't anticipate this having too much to do with Steven Universe Future or the Steven Universe movie, so if you've only completed the 5 seasons known as just Steven Universe, then you should be fine. Anyway, that's the last spoiler warning, so you can't call me a big fat meanie zucchini for not warning you. Theme and adventure ideas. Steven Universe as a show presents us with a seemingly normal and modern world that is frequently subjected to the weirdness of the aliens, aka the crystal gems, that live among them and attract others of their kind. We see, especially early on, that the introduction of gem technology, or gem magic rather, honestly the line seems kind of blurred when you look at things like gem fusion and such, but the introduction of that technology tends to produce weirdness with escalating power, starting with relatively harmless effects, such as producing potentially millions of Guys Toys capsules, as we see in one of the episodes, and as both disturbing and harmful as we see in Frybo. This theme of having gem weirdness cause problems in the modern world should be what drives the primary conflict for our adventure, and should be where we establish the foundation for the adventure that we end up running at our own tables. I've exhausted this point in my other videos, so I'll just very briefly mention that I never build these adventures with the intention that you're going to be playing as titular characters, which would include Steven and the other crystal gems in this circumstance. If you want to build Amethyst as a halfling barbarian, you are welcome to do so yourself, but unless I get a promise that you guys are going to heavily share and retweet the homebrew content that I would make a stat block or character sheet for these characters, I'm going to hold off. Instead, I'll be running on the assumption that we're playing other gems, or perhaps a capable human, if that interests someone at your table, that are inspired by the show. To that end, I would establish that our adventuring party has an interest in preserving the planet Earth that they call home, and reversing whatever gem weirdness prompted this adventure in the first place. And I would personally go on to further establish that this is actually a secondary group of crystal gems that were separated from our crystal gems from the show after the battle for planet Earth, and after all these years have similar motivations, but have set up in a place called Peach City. So with that foundation set, let's go ahead and get a little bit more specific about what we're actually going to do on this adventure. I'm going to look to the premises of a couple of episodes from the show to help draw inspiration from for the game that you end up running at your table. In the events of Mirror Gem and Ocean Gem, we see Steven find the lapis lazuli mirror, and after some initial weirdness with just having a mirror that is mimicking his words, he heals it and finds that lapis lazuli is in fact a gem that's inside, which causes the much more drastic weirdness with the literal theft of the entire ocean. That escalation between episodes is something that we're going to want to emulate with our own adventure, but let's take a look at one more example before we boil it down any further. The episode Steven and the Stevens sees Steven using a time travel technology to produce additional Stevens, which of course produces more problems than it solves later on, because you never mess with time travel, kids. There's always consequences. But in this circumstance, we have what seems to be, well, not good reasons, but at least not bad reasons for using gem technology to produce a certain effect, which obviously gets derailed. And I specifically mention this circumstance because I think it'd be fun to replicate something similar at your game if you can line it up and produce something of the following situation. 4 creatures jump out from the shadows, and as you take in the scene, begin to focus your vision in the chaos that is now surrounding you, you notice that all 4 of these creatures look just like your friend, Stefan. Roll for initiative. So what I'm getting at with these 2 examples is that we want to have some kind of small and harmless weirdness, create some interesting circumstances for the players, but have that segue into creating some more drastic and harmful consequences that hopefully our good aligned party will be inclined to solve. Now, the key here is that the open-ended nature of just finding some magical gem weirdness out in the world is a bit less focused than we need for a typical one-shot adventure, as it is best practice to drop our adventurers right into the action for a very focused one-shot adventure experience. So we've got to either have this weirdness occur off screen, which is going to prompt us on our adventure, most likely included in the adventure prompt itself, or we can have the adventurers out there for a different reason and have this weirdness be a plot point during the adventure itself. And in the latter option is where I think that we'll be finding the adventure that we're covering specifically in this video, but I wanted to provide the former of the 2 options just in case that inspires you more. I'll expand on this in the structuring our adventure section of the video, but I'm going to establish that there is a disturbance that has prompted our adventurers to head out into the world and put the weirdness somewhere along the way in the adventure and escalate it as we go through. Make sure you throw in a lot of red herrings, though, Dungeon Masters, because we've just alerted our players that there is going to be something seemingly harmless that causes big problems that they've got to solve as part of this adventure. All right, I think I need a little change, so let's talk more specifically about our crystal gems. Player characters. Gems are diverse in their abilities and appearance in ways that are not covered in Dungeons & Dragons for sure, and I can imagine the majority of fantasy tabletop role-playing games, which honestly is more freeing than limiting in how we go about deciding what we allow at our tables. There's a couple of ways that we can go about this, and I'm going to start with the one that's a bit more reference material focused before we start talking about the one where we start with a race or class that we'd like to play with first. Characters from the show, while deep, well-written, and diverse, props to Rebecca Sugar and her team for that, can be modeled into a D&D setting with a little finessing. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how I would go about doing this. Let's start with Jasper. She's a big, menacing brute with a powerful build and is very aggressive while she Sonic the Hedgehog style rolls across the battlefield. Those who know the orc race from the Volo's Guide to Monsters will know that I just listed 3 of their traits in that description there. And by comparison to other powerful builds in the selection of monster races, the selection of character races, I chose orc there specifically because they have the aggressive feature, which allows them to move across the battlefield up to their speed as a bonus action, as long as they're moving towards an enemy, which would be perfect for reflavoring with the Sonic the Hedgehog style rolling that we see in the show. Another example, Peridot. She's great with gem tech and tinkering, and she'd be a great fit for an artificer is what I'm saying. The second may be a less illustrious example for sure, but if we've got a simple idea, then we don't need to overthink it. I give these 2 examples as ways that you can work backwards from looking at a character ability in the show that you want to emulate in the way you play your own character, and making that an anchor point for the race, class, and other options that you choose in building your character. A lot of what I think we'll need to do for converting D&D mechanics into this particular setting is going to be simply reflavoring, as is the case if we're trying to make an orc into a jasper, but if there's something small and simple that you're just not finding in the D&D character options, you can beseech your game masters. Be nice to those guys and gals though. Favor to me, if you must, because they've got enough on their plate with building the full adventure without also building homebrew classes and races to fit your character idea. And speaking of flavor, I don't think that we need to use the canon gems that we see in the show if there's something that you see with a race and or class combination that seems to make sense thematically. Just go out and pick a real gem name and say, hey, this is the name of the gem for the character that I want to make. But anyway, here's some rapid fire ideas for how we model some of the characters from the show with D&D classes. Aforementioned Amethyst as a barbarian, Pearl as a dex fighter, Garnet as a punch monk, or a pugilist if your DM allows that kind of thing, Steven as a bard with perhaps a multi-class into cleric for some healing, also aforementioned Peridot as an artificer, Bismuth as a warforged cleric, and Lapis Lazuli as a storm sorcerer. Okay, here's the part that I'm sure you've been waiting for. Gem fusion. All I wanna do is see you turn into a giant woman. But, unsurprisingly, there's not a lot of examples given to us in 5th edition to model this kind of thing. So, we're going homebrew, baby. Don't worry. I've got an idea. I'm actually going to give you a link to the Twitter post that I made about this homebrew in the comment section down below, and I will give you the highlights right here and right now. 2 creatures use their actions on their turns to become a single creature and must describe the dance they perform before making this happen. That creature combines pretty much everything from the 2 individual characters, which includes things like max hit points and current hit points, spells known, spell slots, etc., while taking the higher of the 2 when looking at things like ability scores and proficiency modifiers without doubling up on anything like 2 Great Weapon Masters or being able to get double expertise. Your size becomes large. You gain 2 additional spell slots that are of a spell level 1 higher than the highest spell level that you know, and you can use either spell casting ability for any of the spells that you cast. You deal 1 additional damage die of the weapon you're using on hit. You gain extra attack if you do not have it already, and if either character already has extra attack, you gain extra attack times 2, similar to an 11th level fighter. Lasts 1 minute, fades if you take damage that would take you to below half of the hit points that your gem fusion started at, and can only be used by a character once per day. Sounds fun, right? Now, if you want to produce a homebrew rule set for producing gem fusions of 3 or more gems, you're on your own. Check the Twitter post for the full rule set, and I really hope that you guys end up doing this so you can share with me the unique gem fusions that you end up coming up with. Oh, also, you can set your characters to pretty much any level you want. Just know that the challenge of justifying the spells and abilities that you gain as they pertain to being a gem is going to exponentially continue to get more difficult as you go up in level. On the whole, these player character building suggestions are a bit less direct than I usually like to equip you guys with, but hopefully you now know the process by which you can make whatever character you dream up into a solid and balanced build. Structuring our adventure. Alright, so going on what we set up in the adventure and theme ideas section, we're going to immediately set our adventurers on the way to investigate the gem-related disturbance. This could be something that you just kind of know because of the gem technology that you end up using, or it could be that sentient plants are showing up in Peach City, or any number of small things. This is a smaller detail in the grand scheme of things, so just make sure that it syncs up with whatever the adventurers will be finding as they go through this adventure. We start by finding something or some things, if you're throwing some red herrings out there for your players, that present some initial weirdness with perhaps a brightly glowing gem, though doesn't need to be inside of a bubble in this circumstance. It could be a talking hand mirror, or it could be the aforementioned sentient plants, or any number of little weird things. That weird thing then does weird things and produces some kind of small problem for the players to solve, which can include a low-threat combat, perhaps against some corrupted gems or something. This encounter should give us more clues as to the big disturbance that's coming up next, and after we solve this small problem, I would recommend making a drastic change to the environment that signals the emergence of the cluster from under their feet, the arrival of a homeworld ship, or something else big like that. Then we make our way to the disturbance, perhaps putting a gem technology related puzzle on the way, giving our Peridot Artificer a chance to shine, before we get to the big bad. And I put big bad in quotes here because while D&D is an RPG system that includes and in fact encourages in a lot of circumstances combat, Steven Universe is a show about redemption. So we may want to position this threat in such a way that our players will not want to just outright destroy it. Maybe they just have to fight some awakened plants until they get to the point where they can bring the MacGuffin over to the big bad so that they can cleanse her of whatever's causing problems for her. Or perhaps you need to fight until you can break up a less than consensual fusion between a friendly NPC and your big bad, similar to what we see between Lapis and Jasper when they become Malachite. Whatever you do, make sure it's a happy ending. Steven Universe here is a pretty lighthearted show, most of the time anyway, and I think we should be modeling that in the entire adventure that we end up running. Monsters and challenges. There's a couple of good D&D models for things that we see in Steven Universe that can be dropped right into this adventure, but almost all of them are going to require at least a little bit of reflavoring. The aforementioned awakened plants, aka Watermelon Stevens, can be modeled as awakened trees and perhaps debuffed a little bit if you want to have a bunch of awakened plants that swarm your party. The Centipedal, as named by Steven, which we later find out to be a corrupted Nephrite, could be very easily modeled with the Remoraz from D&D Monster Manual, with just a few adjustments to emphasize the acidic nature of the creature from the show. You can also create other gems as adversaries with stats that align very closely to what the player characters will be getting. And that could be a really fun opportunity for you, the DM, to add to your own headcanon with a new gem of your own creation. I always recommend caution, however, when you're bringing a stat block or perhaps even a character sheet that uses player character abilities and especially spells, because if you don't know that character very, very well, perhaps played them before in a game, you can very much get bogged down with just deciding what to do with the much broader variety of things available to player characters when you're trying to take that NPC's turn. That's just a sample of the monsters, of course, and while we'll definitely have to homebrew the part where a gem will shrink back into its gem upon being defeated, I don't think that we'll have to imagine something entirely new for the majority of what we want to throw at our players, because the D&D Monster Manual and the broader rule sets have enough options for us to pick things that will fit thematically into a Steven Universe adventure, with just a little bit of flavoring, of course. As for other challenges, we've got a lot of great examples of puzzling weird things that Steven needs to solve in the course of the show that we can pull inspiration from. Like when they had to figure out how to decipher the message that the Wailing Stone was trying to transmit, or the time that they had to figure out a literal maze, though mazes in D&D are a little bit complicated, and that's a topic for an entirely different time, or perhaps the time that Steven had to learn how to traverse the oxygenless environment inside of Lion. These are excellent examples for weirdness-type puzzles, and you may be able to steal one directly from the show if you are sneaky enough in your presentation. Players, act like you didn't hear that part, and DMs, we're going to need 200% more red herrings. Stat! I would recommend that any dangerous challenges, specifically talking about traps and other such effects as modeled in a D&D experience, are mostly confined to the environmental challenges that we were talking about before, but of course you can impart your own wisdom on this if you've got another idea. Okay, let's set our players off on their adventure with an adventure prompt. I usually include a dramatically written adventure prompt as part of an adventure handout that I give to my players, which includes things like character starting level, weapon and armor allowance, magic item allowance if it makes sense for the game, as well as a couple other character parameters. How you determine magic item allowance at your table is entirely up to you, and I would recommend that the route you take should include an approach similar to the one that we took for determining class and race options, in that we want to make it make sense for a gem to be able to use the magical abilities produced by these magic items. Things like magic armor and weapons are relatively easy to integrate, and even things like the Cloak of Springing and Striding, as well as the Cloak of Elven Kind, can easily be justified as something that was put forth with the gem when they were created, or perhaps when they were upgraded, in the case of looking at things like the arm and leg attachments that Peridot receives. Anyway, here's the adventure prompt that I would give my players for a Steven Universe one-shot. You are a band of adventurers. Crystal gems, specifically. Refugees from an interstellar war that have chosen planet Earth as their home and have made many friends in the years since. You and your gem friends have experienced a mysterious and alarming change to your gems. They have become clouded, and you expect the shady and villainous hematite to have something to do with it. A pawn of the homeworld gems, you know this hematite to be, but you hope that there is some good in her and will fight to show her that the Earth is worth protecting. Be strong in the real way, show her that she'll always save the day, and help Hematite see that there can be peace and love on the planet Earth in this one-shot based on Steven Universe. That's the end of the adventure prompt. Man, that was a long one, though I guess I'm not too surprised since, like I was saying in the beginning, this is possibly my favorite show ever, and I hope that my lengthy descriptions and ideas inspire you to run a Steven Universe game for your own gaming group. I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section down below. Send this to your game master, and as always, send me pictures, send me stories if you end up running one of these adventures at your own table. I'm a new creator here on YouTube, and that means that every like and comment helps to get this out to an even broader audience. So if you feel that I've earned it, a like on the video would be super appreciated, and a comment, even just gushing about how much you also like Steven Universe, would be super awesome. It's over, isn't it? That was Steven Universe, D&Dified. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram, where I share memes and homebrew content, where I'd also like to hear what else you would have liked to hear me talk about in this video. For the YouTube, subscribing is super appreciated, of course, and you can hit that bell icon if you want to get notifications for these weekly videos. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Happy adventuring.